In this video, we're going to look into the details of plant reproduction. This is part of our homeostasis unit, and most of the images and examples that we use in this video will be taken from our Cognitive Higher Level Biology textbook. So this is a simple flower. This would be an angiosperm flower. Remember, angiosperms are plants that produce flowers and fruits that are packaged. You need to know the male reproductive parts and the female reproductive parts of the plant, as well as some of the other accessory tissues and organs. So first of all, on this side we have the pistil, which is the female reproductive structures, which is consisting of the stigma, right here, the style, and then the ovary. And within the ovary is the ovule, which we'll talk more about. There's also in the male reproductive parts the filaments and the anther, which together make up the stamen, which is the male reproductive structure. The sepals are specialized leaves or petals that protect the bud as it's emerging. And then the petals are usually colorful to attract pollinators. And then the receptacle is also a bulge at the top of the stem just before the ovary emerges. So again, as I mentioned before, the stamen contains the stamen and the anther, or the filament and the anther. The pollen grains in the anther develop into the pollen, which become the male gametes. The pistil, also called the carpel, contains the ovary, the stigma, and the style. And inside the ovary are found the ovules, which contain the egg cells, which are the female gametes. So petals can be brightly colored, as I mentioned before. They can also produce nectar. They can be fragrant, and the whole goal is to attract their pollinators. The receptacles, the swollen part of the stem at the base of the flower. Collectively, the flower is called the corolla. The sepal are specialized leaf-like structures to provide a protective layer of the flower, and altogether the sepals are called the calyx, or the calyx. Many of our pollinators are insects, so bees, butterflies, moths, and so on. So pollen grains. So the tube cell, which is found, this whole thing, there's the whole structure. It's haploid. It develops into the pollen tube, which provides a path for the male gamete. The generative cell forms two haploid sperm cells. The exine is the tough outer layer that provides protection, and then the intine, which is the inner layer here, it is made of cellulose. It's a cell wall that's made of cellulose that helps the pollen grain develop. The ovule is even more complicated, so instead of having 2 cells within, it has 7 cells and 8 haploid nuclei. So first of all, there's the central cell, which is right here. It's a polar cell with 2 haploid nuclei, as you can see. It helps in the formation of the endosperm after fertilization. The antipodals, there's 3 of them. They're small cells. At the opposite side of the cell is the egg. So right there, their job is to nourish the egg. The synergids, which are right here and here, they're 2 cells that surround the egg, and they guide the pollen tube's growth into the ovule to help with fertilization. And then finally, the egg cell, which is the female gamete. So pollination is aided by modulators, and those modulators could be wind that carry the pollen, water, insects, and so on. And it's the act of transferring the pollen from the stamen to the carpel. And when a pollen grain lands on the stigma, it germinates, and the pollen tube starts to grow towards the ovule. So you can see the pollen grain has landed here on the stigma, and then it germinates. So it extends all the way into the ovary and reaches the ovule. And then the sperm cell moves through the micropyle into the ovule. So fertilization. One of the sperm cells fuses with the egg cell to make the diploid zygote. And the other sperm cell fuses with the central cell, which makes a triploid cell, which then becomes the endosperm, which will surround and be the embryo's food source. And just note that double fertilization only occurs in angiosperms. Gymnosperms, ferns, and mosses don't produce an endosperm, so they don't have double fertilization. But angiosperms do. So there's two acts of fertilization that happen. One to form the seed, the new baby plant, and the other to form the endosperm, which feeds the baby plant. So some plants have both male and female structures, so they would be hermaphroditic, and they have the ability to self-pollinate. However, there's less chance of genetic diversity. So while each gamete would be genetically diverse or unique, it would be very much like inbreeding. So the self-fertilization won't provide enough genetic diversity, so they're not unique enough. So plants that are self-pollinated usually have less vigor than plants that are cross-pollinated. So there's a variety of ways of preventing self-pollination, one of them having male and female plants. So the female reproductive organs are found on one plant and the male reproductive organs are on another, or the flower parts are separated on the plant so they're not located nearby, or the pollen and the ovules develop at different times so they can't fertilize themselves. Cross-pollination is when you transfer the pollen from one plant to the stigma of another, and this can be done by the wind, by birds, by bats, by insects, and so on. Now seeds, after fertilization, the flower parts start to fall away. The ovule becomes the seed coat, the ovary becomes the fruit, and then the triploid cell becomes the endosperm, which is found inside the cotyledons. Once the seeds have matured, there's different ways of dispersing the seeds. So they can be dispersed by wind. So these seeds generally are light. They have different adaptations like wings or helicopters to carry them a distance. So dandelions and maple keys would be examples, as you can see in the picture. And then water, some seeds are buoyant, like coconuts and water lilies, and their seeds can be carried from the tree to another location for germination. And then animals, so they can carry the fruit away, eat the flesh and toss the seeds, or eat the seeds and defecate them along with a fertilizer packet. They can even cling to animals' fur to be carried elsewhere, so like a burr when you're walking through the forest. Some seeds, interestingly, cannot germinate without having passed through the digestive system of a specific animal. So if an animal goes extinct that used to process the plant seeds, those plants could go extinct as well. Eventually, it comes time for the plant to germinate. So the seed to germinate. So the seed can lie dormant until the conditions are correct. They could lie dormant for years, decades, centuries sometimes. And the following conditions are required. So water, the seed starts to absorb water, and it begins a series of metabolic reactions that allow cellular respiration to start. They also need the ideal temperature. Generally, the ideal temperature for germination is between 25 and 30 degrees Celsius. And then oxygen. Because when the seed coat bursts, there's a typo there, cellular respiration will begin, cell growth will begin, and so on. And these are the steps of germination. So the first thing that happens is the seed absorbs water and swells, which bursts the seed coat, also called the testa. Water causes metabolic processes that were dormant to start, so cellular respiration provides the energy. Then you end up with hormones like gibberellins being released to start breaking down the food for energy and growth. The radicle emerges first, marking the end of germination, and now the seed has germinated and growth happens. And then the plumule, or the shoot, emerges, and the seed is now called a seedling. And light will be now required for photosynthesis after that point.